Just one more moment. I just want to, I was hoping that Debbie Trope would join us. Audrey, do you know if she is coming today or not sure? Okay. Lo chashuv. Great. Okay. So welcome everyone. It's the gong of 12 o'clock according to my computer. So let's begin. Yes. Thank you, Bob. And I want to acknowledge gratitude to Debbie Trope, who has sponsored today's learning in memory of her father, Henry Trope, and in memory of her husband, Joel Kaufman, who was, for those that don't remember him, was a very, very dear member and leader of our community and someone especially devoted to learning and literacy. He was the founding leader of our library, among other things. So in memory of Henry Trope and Joel Kaufman, we can dig into Parashat Miketz in this most wonderful week of Chanukah, when we're bidden to take a pause and light the menorah and think about the possibility of miraculous outcomes. Join me in a blessing to begin today's learning. So before we recite the formula together, just to take a deep breath and appreciate the gifts that are before us, the gift of this marvelous, rich, and complex tradition, the gift of these texts that continue to provoke our questions and our search for meaning even today, and for the gift of community, to be with one another and to have this time to study. So join me, please. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And just want to especially welcome Debbie Trope, who I see is with us, and as I was saying, to acknowledge Debbie's support for today's learning in memory of her father, Henry Trope, and of course of our beloved Joel Kaufman. And we're very blessed to have those memories with us. And thank you, Debbie. Thank you so much. Well, Parashat Miketz. The story of Joseph has begun. And I know we didn't end up meeting last week, so I wanted to just take a moment and kind of catch us up, because somehow the ancestors have pushed ahead without us, as they generally do. So Parashat Vayeshev, last week's parasha, begins, Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz migurei aviv. Jacob settles, it says, in the land of his ancestors. It goes on to say, Ele toldot Yaakov Yosef, as if to say, these are the generations of Yaakov, and then you're fully expecting a full genealogy, since we know that Jacob has a number of children. But the text wants us to focus right in on Yosef, and it's as if the curtain opens on a whole new segment of this family history. And we went through last week the famous stories of Joseph and his dreams, Joseph and his immaturity to hold his own gifts, Joseph being thrown into the pit by his jealous and angry brothers, Joseph being sold into slavery and making his way to Egypt, facing his difficult moment with the wife of Potiphar, and then being thrown in jail, and then in jail, his gift of divination, his gift of being able to interpret dreams, being the thing that brings him up out of the pit. So he goes into the pit, the actual pit, and then the metaphorical pit in jail, and then comes up out and reaches towards the heights of leadership and power. And by this week, he is, as we know, like second, not even second, but second to Pharaoh, and holds the key to enormous power in the kingdom of Egypt. And so I want to look with you this week, again, at the latter part of Parashat Miketz, in the beginning of what will be a 2-week unfolding of his meeting with these brothers and toying with exactly how he's going to meet them and what the possibilities of forgiveness and reconciliation are. We're only going to get sort of part 1 of that this week. The parasha at the end of this week leaves us really like on a cliffhanger. It almost seems impossible, but it does, and it wants us to come back next week, which we will intend to do. Okay, so for this week, let me share this. Okay, so can everybody see that? Okay, so we're starting with this, there is a hunger in the land. And I'm introducing this as an overarching beginning because there's something important in this part of the parasha about the presence of the famine, the presence of what's missing. It's because of the context of the famine, the environment, the, geopolitical situation, that all of this family coming together begins to happen. Is this, if we didn't have this hunger, none of this reconciliation would happen. And we're going to see that right here in the beginning of chapter 42. So I wonder if there's a way for me to, I wish there was a way for me to move this out of the way. So I still would like to, there. Okay, now I can sort of see you all, but I can sort of still see the text. All right. So now this is Jacob talking. Vayomer hine shamati. He says, okay, I hear, and I tried to bold this. Yesh shever b'Mitzrayim. There are rations, there are resources to be had in Mitzrayim because there's a terrible famine going on all through the land, and Jacob and his sons are trying to figure out how to survive. He says to them, Redu shama v'shivru lanu misham. Go down there, go down to Egypt, and so shivru, the verb form of shever, bring up these resources, go procure. Velo namut, so that we won't die. Vayerdu ache Yosef. It says the brothers of Joseph. It's interesting that it says that, not the children of Jacob, but the brothers of Joseph. Asara lishbor bar b'Mitzrayim. Sorry, lishbor bar b'Mitzrayim. They go down to procure. I love that, I'm in procurement. And notice that this lishbor, it will, in a few minutes, I think, for us, turn out to be such an interesting word because it's connected to this idea of sustenance or resources. It's also brokenness. When you break something in Hebrew, it's nishbar. And that's going to be important in some of the commentary I want to look at with you. Okay, but let's go on. Ve'et Binyamin achi Yosef lo shalach Yaakov. Benjamin was held back. Yaakov held him. Ki amar pen yikrenu ason. Jacob is not taking any chances, and he's saying this child, the only remaining child from his beloved Rachel, of course Rachel's long gone, and Yosef, as far as he knows, is gone. So the only one who's left is Benjamin, and he says, I'm going to hold him back because disaster might meet him on the road. Because one of the commentaries I was reading earlier was pointing out, as far as Jacob knows, Joseph met disaster on the road. Remember at the beginning of Parashat Vayeshev, it's Jacob that says to Joseph, go find your brothers, go out and find them. And it's in being in that sort of limbo place of traveling that he meets with disaster. And Rachel dies on the road. As we remember from a few weeks ago, she's also on the derech, and she dies and is buried there.
And also, when Rachel was sitting on the teraphim, when Laban came to get her, Jacob actually said, and this is such a tragic thing, if you can find those teraphim with us, that person shall die.
Correct. Yes, we talked about that 2 weeks ago. Yeah, he doesn't realize that he's sentencing his wife to die, but he does. Yes. Okay, so let's keep going and just notice. I mean, I was talking with David Cuny about this. Just the whatever level of Hebrew comfort we have, it's just so delicious to look at the layers of meaning that are baked in here. So that's why I really like going through this in the Hebrew as much as we can. Vayavo b'nei Yisrael, the children of Israel came, lishbor, to procure, b'toch habaim, ki haya hara'av ba'aretz Canaan. So they go down, and the text is emphasizing to us there's this famine going on. Like, that's the backdrop. You're at the opera, and you know that the set is as important as the singers on the stage, and the set here is the famine. The fact that there is nothing to eat, the fact that death is right at their doorstep, and it forces them to make a move. Okay, now Joseph. Yosef haya hu hashalit al haaretz. He was in control of all the land. Hu hamashbir. He was the procurer. Same word, shabir. You see that? He was in charge of dispensing lechol am haaretz, to all of the people of the land. Vayavo achei Yosef. Interesting again here. They're referred to as the brothers of Joseph. Vayishtachavu lo apayim arza, and they bow down and they, prostrate in front of him. And then here I bolded this. I think it's easier to see the bolding in the English than the Hebrew, but you can see here verse 7. Vayar Yosef et echav vayakirem vayitnaker alehem. So it says Joseph sees these brothers and he right away recognizes them. Vayakirem. And his immediate reaction is vayitnaker, to make himself a stranger. Vayitnaker, when you have that lehit prefix, it's reflexive. It's a most active, explicit posture that he takes. He makes himself a stranger. Vayidaber itam kashot, he speaks to them harshly. Vayomer alehem me'ayin batem, he says to them, where are you all from? Vayomru me'eretz Canaan lishboroch, and they say, we're from the land of Canaan, we're just here because we're starving. Okay, let's go on. Vayaker Yosef et achav, he recognizes them. Vehem lo hikiruhu, they did not recognize him. So picture him. He's there with some kind of Egyptian royal costume on. He speaks with an Egyptian accent. He has an Egyptian name. He's able to hide behind all of it and make himself a stranger. And yet, what does the Torah say in this moment when they don't recognize him? What's the first thing that happens to him? Vayizkor et hachalomot. He remembers the dreams, asher chalam lahem. He remembers the dreams that he had. So now the Torah is referring back to the beginning of Parashat Vayeshev, when Joseph, as sort of like this obnoxious teenager, says, I had these dreams, and in these dreams, it's very clear that I'm going to be in charge of you one day. And they don't like that, and that, of course, is the motivation for them to treat him so horribly, and initially to contemplate killing him. But then, of course, we know that Reuven and later Yehuda take a role in keeping that from happening. He says to them, Miraglim atem, I think you're spies. Lir'ot et ervat haaretz batem, you've come to see us bear. And of course, I'm going to go on. I had to break these up into chunks because I whatever. I have it all here for us. Okay, going on now, verse 13. They say, no. Avadecha achim. Anachnu. We are just here at your service. B'nei ish echad be'eretz Canaan v'hinei hakaton et avinu hayom v'ha'echad einenu. They say, we are not spies. We were 12 brothers. We belong to this man in Canaan. His name is Jacob. They don't say that. And they even go as far as saying, like, they don't just say, here we are, the 10 of us. We're just here for some food. They make a point of saying, we were 12, and there are 2 who are not here. One is back with our father, Benjamin, of course, and one, they say, einenu, he no longer exists. And of course, they're talking about Joseph, who's standing right in front of them, but they don't obviously know that. So again, this image of emptiness, of nothingness, of what's missing, and now it's actually Joseph that's non-existent. Okay, we're skipping ahead just a tiny bit. Joseph begins to toy with them. He says, well, you'll have to prove that you are who you say you are. So let me go now to verse 16. Shilchu mikem echad. One of you better go and bring this youngest brother. Vayikach et achichem va'atem he'asru. I need to see this younger brother in order to feel sure of that you are who you say you are. And I wanted to skip down here. So remember what's going on here. Joseph knows who they are. They don't know who he is. They don't know that he can understand what they're saying when they speak to each other in their own language. So skip down here now to verse 21. Vayomru ish el achiv, they said to one another, aval ashamem anachnu, we are being punished. Al achinu asher ra'inu. What?
I have a real problem with the translation of the word ashemim, meaning punished. It means guilty. It means guilty. And it's very important that the brothers experience guilt for what they did.
Okay. They are being punished for being guilty. That's how they are beginning
But the punishment is an action of Joseph. Ashemim is an action of them themselves. I think there's a big difference there.
Okay. Thank you. I don't know if the Hebrew would look different in that case, but okay. I think
the Hebrew would be ne'enash, ne'enashim, right, from onesh.
Right.
And so, ashemim is guilty.
Okay. Thank you. I think that what Shlomo is pointing to is centrally important because it's in this moment, again, is in the backdrop of the famine, that these brothers, at Jacob's behest, have said, okay, it's time to go forward. And it's because they're now in this moment of being challenged in their quest for food that they begin to experience their sense of guilt. As if to say, until this time, they were kind of just going on about their business and not thinking about this, but it's the backdrop of the famine, the backdrop of the word is escaping me. The opposite of plenty that's causing them to contemplate their own guilt. Where was I? Aval ashemim anachnu al achinu, asher ra'inu tzarat nafsho. We saw the suffering of his soul. Behitchanenu elenu, velo shamanu al ken ba'a elenu hatzara hazot. We did not pay attention. We didn't respond to his anguish, and this is why we're now suffering. Okay, and I'm just skipping down a little bit just because there's so much text here. Reuven comes back to speak to them, basically saying, see, I told you this was going to happen. Verse 23, Vehem lo yadu ki shomea Yosef. So Yosef is hearing all of this. Ki hamelitz benotam. There was an interpreter between them, so they think that they can just speak in private. But he is hearing the whole thing. And it's him hearing them say to themselves, we're guilty. We're just realizing how guilty we are, and that's why we're being punished. And look at his response, verse 24. Vayisov me'alehem vayevch. He turns away from them and starts to cry. Vayashov alehem vayadaber alehem. He returns to them and speaks to them. Vayikach meitam et Shimon vaye'esor oto le'enehem. He holds Shimon back right in front of them. Vayitzav Yosef vayimle'u et kelehem bar ulehashiv kaspehem ish el sako. We'll just finish this in English here. Joseph gives orders to fill their bags with grain, return each one's money to his sack, and give them provisions for the journey. And this was done. Okay. I think I'm gonna. I want to go on a little bit with some commentary, and then we may be able to come back to some of the text here. But a great drama is unfolding before us. So first, look with me at this. This is from Aviva Zornberg, and she's playing with some of the verses we were looking at above. So she starts by saying, like his mother Rachel, Joseph is Einenu. Remember, we saw that up here? What are the chances that I could find it here? When the brothers introduce themselves to Joseph, they say about him, V'ha'echad Einenu. That word, he is not. He is non-existent. And it's interesting that they don't say he was murdered or he was tortured, or they just say he's. Joseph is Einenu, and he learns to use the energy of his disappearance to reconstitute his dispersed identity. So interesting already here. She's saying to us, Joseph, having been exiled, dispersed in a sense, loses his sense of self. I mean, he takes on another identity, which turns out to be a very powerful one in the concrete world, but he's lost who he is. For Joseph is lost, as she says, both to his family and to himself. And now she's going to quote here what we read above. When Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, he recognized them, but he acted like a stranger toward them. He made himself a stranger, veit naker, and spoke harshly to them. And now she's going to invoke Rashi. He acted to them like a non-Jew in his way of speaking. His language was harsh. He tests his actual alienation, his lostness, by taking it almost to a point of caricature. Conscious of the perils of assimilation, of forgetting his native culture, he acts, he speaks, in a style and tone barbaric to a Jewish ear. Okay, so he's just doing everything he can to hold on to this assumed identity that he has, perhaps because the internal one that was his real identity is lost to him. He is in search of it somehow. And now with these brothers standing in front of him, you feel the kind of prick of his own heart. He starts to, he can't hold back his tears. His purpose is hinted in the fact that the root of vayit naker, that word we had above, he acted like a stranger, or I would say he made himself into a stranger, is the same as that of vayakirem. He recognized them. So it's just a fascinating, I guess this happens in English too, although I don't know exactly, I can't think of any examples, but the opposites almost are melded together somehow. The root, nakar, means to perceive by making strange. That is, to know by breaking up, she says, the smooth continuities of things and focusing on the singularity of the object. In order to finally be known by his brothers in a way that will heal the rifts of the past, Joseph makes himself strange to the point of uncanniness. He makes himself strange to the point of uncanniness. In this way, he can, for the first time, hear them as they remember their deafness to Joseph's cries from the pit. So the reconciliation is beginning right here, I believe, because it's in his ability to hide himself, to keep himself strange, to keep himself, behind a veil from them at this part of the story, allows him to hear that, as Shlomo was saying, they actually do have some sense of I don't know if it's remorse. I don't know if you could say remorse. That's a question I would ask all of you. Do they feel remorse, or do they just recognize that, midah keneged midah, like what comes around goes around, and that finally the payment for their cruelty to him and their violence towards him is coming home to roost. But there's something about him hearing them begin to make this admission to themselves, because right in this part of the parasha, in this part of the story, as far as they know, they're only talking to each other. But it's the fact that he can hear them that begins to pierce his own shell of masked identity. I'll put it that way. So I have a long midrash that I want to look at with you, but I'd like to pause here and just invite your comments, your questions, anything that's coming up for you around what's going on with Joseph. So let's start with you, Myrna.
Well, what struck me as I was listening to you read the parsha was Joseph's initial reaction. I was thinking, if I hadn't seen my brothers, well, I don't know how many years it is, but it's a number.
Yep.
My first reaction would not be his pulling back and not he felt no emotion, or if he felt emotion at that moment, he certainly pushed it down or repressed it. Mm-hmm. And Aviva Zornberg picks up on this piece. Mm-hmm. But I was struck as you were reading it, how kind of unnatural it is. If you haven't seen your siblings for X number of years, I would think that the initial reaction would be an emotional one of, oh my God, how good to see you. Or so he is acting as the ruler, or the in his position, but he is denying or maybe he doesn't have those feelings. But I was just sort of struck by what seemed so unnatural to me in
but
his.
Myrna, I'm thank you, and I'm wondering if it's possible for us to put ourselves in these shoes. If the last interaction we had with these family members was that they were trying to kill us, or that they at least were, like sell us into oblivion, would you still say, oh, I am overcome with emotion to see them? Because as I think Audrey's just said in the chat, he wept. He does weep, but he doesn't weep until he starts hearing them say, I guess this is, like that he realizes they carry some sense of remorse or guilt. I don't know if it's remorse. I don't know. Would you still say that? You still would say, why isn't he reacting more emotionally?
Yeah, it's clearly an ambivalent situation. I mean, I could see him reacting both ways, mm-hmm. but I was struck by how cold his initial reaction, how cold and removed. There was nothing, there was no emotion in it, and somehow he had repressed, or I hear what you're saying, Rachel, and it's totally plausible. I'm just bringing out another possible reaction.
Well, when you say it that way, it makes me think of the beginning of Aviva Zornberg's commentary that I posted here, which is that he's lost himself in the process of growing into this marvelous leadership position that he has. He's had to shut down his own humanity.
And I so appreciate her reaction, because she really was addressing the point that I was feeling. Mm-hmm. And it explains why his reaction is what it is.
Why he held himself in check. So
he isn't the Joseph, the young Joseph that we meet several sections earlier.
Not at all. Right. Great. Thank you. All right. I'm just seeing hands. Carol, Bob, Barkin, Shlomo. So Carol, don't forget to unmute.
To my untutored ear, Einenu sounds like Hineni.
Oh.
Is linguistically, are they connected? Here and not here?
Right. I mean, certainly not on the face of it. I can absolutely understand you're hearing the sonically, they're very connected. They're both, double nuns with a vowel sound at the beginning, sort of Einenu and Hineni. That's so interesting. they're actually, I mean, I'm making this up, but they're kind of opposite of each other in a, yin and yang sort of way. Like Enenu is non-existent. It doesn't have, and Hineni is, I am here. I'm present.
Yeah.
So in that sense, you could make the argument that they're connected, although I think that's our own modern midrash.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Bob Barkin, go ahead.
Well, this is clearly a screwed up family. And, to Myrna's point, I think later, jumping ahead, when he meets Jacob, it's still a screwed up, introduction. We don't have to go into that, but it's not just the brothers. I mean, it's his relationship with his father. His father doesn't say, "Where have you been?" But what's always struck me is how the brothers are always speaking as one. Every once in a while, they'll take a singular one,
Right.
but all the brothers speak. All the brothers say, and it's sort of this, they've lost their identity too. I mean, they're just kind of a blob of brothers. And then eventually one or two will emerge.
Right.
And I think that's parallel to Joseph emerging, that Joseph emerges as a singular character. And I think it's a Judah who stands up and
Next
gives
week,
a great
yes.
speech. Yeah.
Vayigash Elav Yehuda.
And I think those are parallel, but the rest of them, basically, even at the very end, are lying to him, about what the father promised him, when we jump ahead. So I don't think there's a lot of remorse among them. I think individually there is some growth, certainly in Joseph and Judah, but for the rest of them, I think there's still a sad lot.
I love the image that as they begin to emerge a little bit, at least he's beginning to emerge. Thank you for that. And it's right. Yehuda comes forward. He already has, and we've already had the whole chapter of Judah and Tamar, where he gets fleshed out much more as a character. And Reuven we hear a little more from. And Shimon and Levi keep, carrying on their strange karma. Great, thank you. Okay, go ahead, Shlomo, then Audrey, then Luther, and then I do want to get in this other midrash to look at together.
I've got a whole different take on this, and I think Yosef. We know about Yosef that he has some kind of a connection to the future.
Why?
And I think from the dreams about he had as a kid, as a child, he could see so he has an interesting connection to the future. And I think when he first sees his brothers, he's saying to himself, what's the future going to be between me and my brothers? And he has an understanding that there can't be any future between him and his brothers if they don't make teshuvah. And I think it's Yosef, not the Rambam, who tells us what teshuvah is about. And everything that happens to his brothers in jail, put the money in the sack, give Benjamin all of that is not toying with. It's Yosef's plan to get his brothers to take the steps to make teshuvah. The first step was, we are guilty for what we did. And the second step is, as Bob has already alluded to it, when Yehuda comes up and says, take me, don't take Benjamin, the second step of teshuvah, and it's only then, after those two steps of making teshuvah are done, that Joseph can say, I'm your brother Joseph, go get daddy, bring him down here, and let's live happily ever after in Goshen.
Right.
So I don't think Yosef is toying with his brothers at all. It's all part of his plan to have a successful teshuvah made so they can have a future together. And just comment on Myrna's thing, I think the fact that several times during this whole thing, Yosef cannot contain himself and has to hide his own crying. I think it's 2 or 3 times during the whole interaction that he can't contain his crying. 3. So anyhow, that's my take on this.
Great. So, but are you saying, Shlomo, that you think, I mean, at some point, this is all planned out. He's not just kind of making this up as he's going along. Is that what
I
you're
don't
saying?
think so. I think he sees his brothers. I recognize his connection to the future. And one
Yeah.
of the first questions he says is, so what's going to be the future between me and my brothers?
Yeah.
And if
Great.
I want this kind of a future, teshuva has to occur before we can have any kind of a relationship together.
Mm-hmm,
So I
mm-hmm.
want to credit Yosef, not the Rambam, with telling us what
Teaching
teshuva
us
is all about.
Teshuvah. Yeah. Okay. Let's credit Yosef, definitely. But also Rambam. But I want to hold on to that because the midrash that I hope to look at with you is going to poke at some of what you're saying, or possibly support it. So great. Audrey, Luther.
Right. Just real quickly, when you talked about the backdrop of the famine and like the opera, it just really struck me that that heightened a lot of what's going on right now. And similarly, in the book of Ruth, the
Mhm.
setting of what takes place because of the famine really
Yep.
sets the whole thing in motion. And it's
Absolutely.
as if our circumstances that we find ourselves in really kind of drill down into these family relationships. How do we have them? How do we maintain them? Who's in our family? Who's not in our family?
Yeah.
And it's so much based on these outside circumstances. So I just couldn't help but making that parallel. I mean, it's pretty obvious, but the fact that if there wasn't a famine, none of this would have been going on. And it's kind
Absolutely.
of like this outside influence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, thank you. And like the book of Ruth, it's the famine that forces movement.
Right.
Family can make a move and do something different, and that sort of pushes them into a whole
Right.
new
physically
trajectory.
making a move. They've got to leave where they are to do something different.
Right.
And we're seeing it right now in our own world. We're seeing that kind of movement of people and family and what's happening in reconciliation or not reconciliation.
Yeah.
So that's my thought.
I was going to say, I'm actually feeling right now rather confined by what's going on in the world, but no, just being cheeky. Okay. Okay, Luther, please.
Two things really. One is that, as I think people have pointed out, remorse and guilt are very, very different things. And it is possible to feel incredibly guilty and appalled without really experiencing any sense of remorse. All you have to do is look at defendants who break into tears and weep when their charges are read to them in court, to understand that that is weeping not because one feels remorse, but because one has been caught.
Uh-huh.
And I think that early on, that's where the brothers are. They're like, oh, expletive.
Uh-huh.
Boy, are we in trouble.
Uh-huh.
But
And that's different from
that's different from reaching a point where you can make atonement.
yes.
The other thing, though, is that I think I'm not convinced that Joseph plans all this. Partly because I've realized that most of us are really just winging it most of the time,
Mhm.
And Joseph is really complex because he is a traumatized human being.
Yes.
He was cast into that pit. He was sold into slavery. All this stuff has happened, and that's one reason he becomes so alienated from his origin. Why would he want anything to do with that?
Mm-hmm.
Look where it got him. It takes the appearance of the brothers to cause him to even start on a path toward teshuva, for lack of a better way to put it, teshuva in which he returns to confront his own origin story. And I think there's a lot of improv going on. Of course, it doesn't look like that now because the redactors made it into a really nice, tight, and really compelling drama. But I think he's improvising.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. And I really appreciate your helping us to distinguish between guilt and remorse. I think that's an important distinction to understand. David, go ahead, and then we'll switch over.
I read ahead, and according to Joseph, in a couple chapters from now, it's God's plan.
Right. I mean, that's his. You're like, I'll just drop the microphone there because there's nothing else to. Yeah, that's where Joseph lands, and that's how he's sort of able to make peace with the whole thing, I think, in his own mind. But on the subject of whether this was preordained or not, look with me at this midrash. Now I have to say before I screen share it, there is no translation for it. I only have it in its original, so I'm just going to be walking us through sections of it. And I know that foreign language is a barrier, so I'm not trying to put a barrier in our way, but I just think this midrash has such interesting things to say, and we'll see if you agree with me. And I want to say, by way of kind of introducing it, I don't know about you, but I feel continually, inspired by the love for the text that I feel when I read some of these midrashim. And so it makes me feel like I want to love this text as well. I don't necessarily read it the same way that our ancestors read it, but that's part of what I get out of reading some of these early midrashim. So I just invite you to kind of be open to that possibility. Okay, so this is from Midrash Rabbah, Genesis Rabbah. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I want to look at this with you a little bit. Okay, so this is a section of Midrash Rabbah that's starts with the same place where we started our reading. So just let me scroll back up there. This passage. Ki yesh shever b'Mitzrayim. Jacob sees this. There's sustenance to be had. Let's go down and get it. And there's almost the feeling of, like Jacob does at the beginning of Parashat Vayeshev, when he says to Joseph, go forward and find your brothers. Here he's saying to the brothers, go forward. It's in the guise of, go get some food for us. But there's almost the feeling of, something big is about to happen. Jacob knows it in a sense. I would agree with Shlomo that Joseph is the one with the ability to see the future, not necessarily Jacob. But in this sentence, the rabbis take off. Okay, so hold this in your mind. Yesh shever b'Mitzrayim. There is sustenance, and remember that shever is another one of those words that can be almost its opposite. Shever is plenty, resources, and shever, lishbor, is to break, something that's broken. Okay, let me go back now to here. Okay, so this midrash is now commenting on that phrase. Vayar Yaakov ki yesh shever b'Mitzrayim. He sees that there's this possibility of sustenance. V'chi b'Mitzrayim haya Yaakov shera'a tvua b'Mitzrayim. He sees that there's produce in the land. I'm going to skip down. Some of these older texts kind of repeat themselves multiple times, and we're not reading the Torah here. We're reading rabbinic commentary on the Torah, so we don't read it with the same, level of reverence. And on the other hand, if we stopped and said, now, why is this being repeated over and over? It's like polishing something. You kind of make repetitive motions until you can see it clearly. Okay, so here we made a few repetitive motions about this situation of famine and plenty that's being sought. Here, V'halo amar levanav, saying to his sons, Vayomer, hine shamati, ela miyom shenignav Yosef. On the day that Yosef was stolen away, Nistakla ruach hakodesh mimenu. There arose a Holy Spirit from him, and the text is going to get a little enigmatic here. Veroeh ve'eno roeh. It sees, and it doesn't see. v'shomea ve'eno shomea, it hears and it doesn't hear. Like, is the hand of God really here? Maybe not. Umipnei ma lo ne'amar yesh ochel b'mitzrayim. Shamar katuv ki yesh shever b'mitzrayim. Okay, so again, playing with this idea that there's the backdrop of the famine, as we've been saying. There's the possibility of produce, of sustenance, of life-giving, produce. And the mention of this moment when Joseph is stolen away. It uses the word lignov, shenignav, stolen away or kidnapped, basically. So it's reaching all the way back into the beginning of Parashat Vayeshev. Okay, let me go on now. Here, Vatirav kol eretz Mitzrayim. All of Egypt was hungry. All of Egypt was in a state of hunger. Umat Talmud Lomar, what does this teach us? Yesh shever, that there was sustenance. Ela al tihi kore yesh shever, but don't read it as shever. Ela yesh sever. Okay, and this is where, so you can see these words, shever and sever. And this is where the rabbis, here I could maybe try to even highlight. No. I can highlight them. Shever and sever. You guys can see that? Okay, and this is where the rabbis definitely, Carol Kranowitz and everybody else, they are taking great liberties. And they're saying, well, it sounds similar, so let's explore what it might mean next to each other. Sever is a word that means possible answer, possible solution, interesting possibility. Okay? Shera'a be'aspeklaria shesivru b'mitzrayim. Sivro b'mitzrayim. This word is so fascinating. Aspeklaria is a speculum. It's like a looking glass through which you can see something that not everyone can see, or not everything can see. In some of the rabbinic writings, it says, in some of the mystical writings also, that the prophets, the great prophets of Israel, could see through the aspeklaria. They could see through the speculum of God in one direction. Moshe Rabbeinu alone could see in both directions. He could be seen by God and look back to God. But this is now going to refer to Joseph. As Shlomo was saying before, Joseph has a window on the future. So look at this. Shera'a ba'aspeklaria shesivro b'mitzrayim, and a possibility of envisioning an interesting, fruitful outcome in Mitzrayim. Ve'eze zeh, who is this? Which is this? Zeh Yosef. This is Joseph. Joseph is the one who has this ability to see an important solution in the midst of this famine. Okay, now we go back to Jacob. Vayomer levanav, lama titra'u. Amar Yaakov levanav, he says to his sons, Atem giborim, you're strong, you're in the prime of your lives. Atem na'im, you're nice looking. Al tikansu b'sha'ar echad, va'al ta'amdu b'makom echad. Don't enter in one gate. When you go down to Egypt, don't go through one gate. Don't stand in one place. Shelo tishlot bachem ayin hara, so that you won't fall under the control of the secret police. You'll be able to kind of make your way in from different directions. Okay, hang in there with me just a little bit more here. I know this is not as easy, but it's, I think, going to be interesting for us. Hine shamati ki yesh shever b'mitzrayim. He says to them again, I've heard that there's shever, there's produce down there. Redu shama, go down. Mahu v'redu, shera'a sheyerdu vayishtabdu b'mitzrayim. Go ahead and be servants there. Okay, now davar acher, another idea, another perspective. Redu shama, go down. Shekol halokeach tvua min hashuk yerida. All those who go down to the shuk. Here we go. they're quoting again now from the Torah, Vayerdu Ache Yosef. They went down, the brothers of Joseph, Bnei Yisrael. Okay. And I wanted to just get to this part here. Ela batchila lo nahagu bo achava umechoruhu. Ulesof, at the end, and finally, mitchartin ve'omrim ematai nered lemitzrayim nachzir et achenu. So this midrash here, in this little passage here, is suggesting that the brothers actually were going down to try to find Joseph. They were going down with the intention of trying to nachzir et achenu le'aviv, to return our brother Joseph to our father. Uchshe'amar lahem avihem lered lemitzrayim, natnu kulam da'at echad lachachziro. When Jacob says to them to go down to Mitzrayim, they all were given kind of one unified thinking, a la Bob Barkin. They all sort of thought together, one idea or one thought, lachachziro, to return him. So it's again in the midst of this famine that something is sparked, that they want to make this family come together again. Okay, and then one last part. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, this is not the same Yehuda in our story. Af Yosef Yodea Haya She'echav Yordin LeMitzrayim Lishbor Ochel. In the time when Joseph came to know that his brothers had come down to take part of the provisions that were there, Ma'asa, what did he do? Hoshiv. He returned to Shomrim al Kol HaPtakim. He went to like the people in charge of the distribution. Va'amar lahem, Ra'u kol mi shenichnis lishbor ochel. Look, make sure you pay attention to everyone who enters in search of food. Kitvu shemo v'shem aviv. Write down his name and the name of his father. La'erev haviu ptakim. In the evening, they brought Joseph the little notes they had made. Va'asu kach. Kevan sheba'u b'nei Yaakov, kol echad ve'echad. So in the moment that the children of the sons of Jacob came, each one, nichnas b'sha'ar shelo. Each one entered in his own gate. V'katvu et shmotam. And they wrote down each one of their names. La'erev haviu lo haptakim. And they brought him the notes, Joseph. Ze koreh Reuven ben Yaakov. V'achad koreh Shimon ben Yaakov. V'achad Levi. Etc., etc. So this midrash goes on and on for many more lines. But what drew my attention here were two things. One, that at least in the midrashic mind, the brothers are involved in some kind of mission to bring their brother back. They don't even realize it yet, but that's what they're there to do, to reconstitute this family. And a la what I think, Shlomo, what you were saying, Joseph actually has a master plan here. He even says to his staff, I want you to write down the name of everyone coming in here and bring it to me. And then he's got a rishima, like a listing of the names of these brothers and the name of their father, so that when they show up in front of him, he knows just what to do with them. And he is prepared. So I'll stop there, stop the share there. We have just a few final moments here. And again, I appreciate your patience in walking through that text, which I know is a little bit, takes a little bit of patience to get through, but just want to see where you land in relation to some of what the ancestors are suggesting to us. Carol, were you going to, oh, Shlomo, Carol, it looks like you're going to say something.
Yeah.
No, okay. Shlomo, go ahead.
I just want to comment that I don't think Joseph did lose his connection to his origins, because before he dies, he says, "V'ha'alitem et atzmotai leKanaan, and you should bring my and he makes him promise to bring his bones back to Canaan.
Yes.
And when Moshe, many hundreds of years later, according to the text, and the children of Israel go back, they take Joseph's bones back, and in the end of the book of Joshua, they bury his bones.
Right.
So I think, and what's also interesting is the use of the verb v'ha'alitem, because that's the first use, I think, of the word aliyah with regard to going back to Israel or Canaan. So that Israel or Canaan already has a very special place. I mean, go to Egypt, leave Canaan, and Yaakov uses the word yerdu, go down. When you're leaving Canaan, you're going down.
Correct.
When you're going to Canaan, you're going up. I think that means Joseph still has a pretty good connection.
But he only says that at the end of his life, after he's already gone through this whole long process with his family. So I don't know. Okay. I don't know if he has that connection until after he's been through all of this. But thank you. Yes. Audrey, and then Marty, I don't know if you were going to say something.
I just have a quick question. Why do you think the rabbis needed to lift up the brothers? Is if the brothers knew somehow that Joseph was there? Because that just seems like it's coming out of left field. What do you think the rationale was for the brothers? Why the rabbis needed to do that?
Well, I connected to this, and this is, I think it was Shlomo who said this a few minutes ago, or maybe it was David. No, it was David Kupfer who said, if you read on, the famous kind of climax of the whole thing where Joseph says to the brothers, I want you to know it's okay because this was all part of God's plan. This was all, we're all just actors on a stage here, and the whole thing is elevated because God's finger is on this whole thing, or God's the stage manager here, as I like to think of God. Pulling down the screen at just the right time, or changing the set at just the right time, etc. If they're doing their job well. So it's all okay, and in that same sense, I think what this midrash is saying, from the moment that Jacob says Yesh shever b'Mitzrayim, God is somehow pulling all the strings, and like marionettes, the brothers are going down and saying, maybe even not to their knowledge, although the midrash does say da'at echad, like one of one mind they are there to, I don't know, even against their own will, to reconcile the family, to bring the brothers back together, which is what ultimately happens. So that's the only connection I can find in, that brings us back to the text, saying that this is really part of a much larger plan. In fact, the famine itself has been brought about so that this family can find one another and reconnect. So I'm just looking at, I think this is a comment from Gail here. Why were all 10 brothers sent on this mission? Jacob was possibly going to lose all of his sons to whatever on the road. And again, so Gail, are you saying why did he send all 10?
Yeah, it's just kind of interesting that once again he keeps a favorite son with him.
Yeah.
And I wonder what that does to the rest of the family. And if you think it's going to be God's plan, or to have the reconciliation happen, but it's still kind of interesting that having lost one child in this process, that he would send all of his children out.
Well, and so I think it was Bob Barkin who said, this dysfunctional family, and like my husband Jonathan likes to say, putting the fun back in dysfunctional here. In the early part of Parashat Vayeshev, when Joseph is, kind of carrying on with his ability to tell dreams and to show that he's going to be in charge of all of them one day, etc., their reaction is absolute hatred towards him. By this part of the story, when Joseph, the vice president of Egypt, is standing in front of them and saying to them, if you want to prove your innocence to me, you'll have to show me that little brother. They basically plead. They say, we can't, because it will kill our father. He will die if we do this to him. They don't hate Benjamin. In other words, they, at least in that one little way, they've kind of grown up a little bit, or they've matured, and they're able to protect that younger brother instead of, being jealous with rage towards him. So I don't know if that answers the question you're asking, but
It's just an interesting sidebar.
yeah, it is interesting. Well, the parasha leaves us with no resolution, and that's how we're going to have to leave ourselves for today. We'll have to come back next week to hear how this all finally does wrap up. Debbie, do you want to say anything?
Well, the only thing I was going to say, and I know we're out of time, so it was just that I was more struck by the issue about Joseph recognizing himself as belonging to Canaan and his family roots. And I think that in the shock of seeing his brothers, and he present, I think he recognized, oh my God, like it's really like no matter where you go, there you are. Okay, you can't run away from who you are. You're shaped by that. You're shaped by your formative experiences. And I think that it may be this really transformational moment in him that we need to focus a bit more on.
That by seeing them, that truth.
The connection, despite the anger, despite the resentment, despite his ability to assimilate superficially into another society, still, this is still his blood. This is still his roots. And I think it stirs something within him very deep.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, as we were saying before, 3 different times he starts to cry. And then has to kind of get control of himself before he's finally ready to say, I am who I say I am. So thank you. Let me just read you the end of Parashat Miketz. It just leaves us hanging. There's no kind of nice closing genealogy or anything like that. He catches them with the goblet that he has planted to make them look like thieves. And he says to them, what is this thing that you have done? Do you not know that a man like me practices divination, it says in the text? Don't you know that I can tell what's going on? And Judah is the one who replies, what can we say? How can we plead? How can we prove our innocence? Because of course they are innocent, because he put the cup in there. God has uncovered the crime of your servants. Here we are then, your slaves, the rest of us as much as anyone who is in possession of that goblet. And Joseph replies and says, oh no, only he in whose possession the goblet was found shall be my slave. The rest of you go back in peace to your father.
And that's critical to his plan.
Yes.
It has to be Benjamin.
Correct. So he holds Benjamin, and that's where we're going to have to leave it until we can come back next week and find out what happens. So thank you all so much for tuning in. Debbie, again, thank you for your support for our study today. Everyone stay well. Chanukah Sameach. Come back tonight at 7:30 for some wonderful Zohar.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel.
Rachel, what do you think of the relationship between shever and the English expression to break bread?
It's great.
And the connection between breaking and food, and mazon and zayin, a dagger, and ochel and ma'achelet, which is a weapon, and shulchan and shelach, which is a weapon. It's all food and fighting, and it suggests to me that in the beginning of society, or even before that, if you had food, you had to protect it because somebody else. So there's all these words which mean food and which means weapon, or
wow,
pretty interesting.
That's great.
That's great. It's all about substance, right?
Yeah. I mean,
survival.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you.
Kol hakavod. Thank you.
Great.
I'm afraid to go eat lunch now.
Well, you
Don't
began by
use too many weapons.
You began by saying how much into the language you are.
Yes. I
Me
mean,
too.
it's fascinating.
That study's so great. So thank you. That was wonderful.
Great to see you all. B'tei avon.